Unzipping the images for today. I'm playing a little fast and loose here with the locations of these image files, but I want to jump ahead a little bit to page 4, step 5, where to save the images for Revit materials. To keep Revit files from getting even bigger than they already are, Revit doesn't store the JPEGs, the images we're using for materials, as well as for backgrounds, decals, and textures in the Revit model itself. When you open a file, it looks on disk to see what that particular background image is, and then brings that image into your drawing. If that image is deleted or renamed, that stuff will just render gray. So on my main computer at home, I have a folder for Revit families and I have a folder for Revit images. And that has subfolders for people, stone, carpet, jelly beans, brick, clouds, all sorts of things. So that's just where they are and that's where they stay. With the projects that you're doing for Studio, 2 or 3 of you might be working on the same file. And I would suggest that whoever is creating that material, if you're saving to OneDrive, for instance, you have a folder in OneDrive where the Revit file stays, that's where you put the image files for that project. When you end up copying them, let's say at the end of the term, when you each download your own separate copy to have locally, you can keep them right there. And the first time you look at one of those files, Revit's going to say, I can't find that background. And you can say, oh, that's because it's over here on your computer now. And then Revit will realize, okay, that's the path. I can go find all the others that are there. So you just have to make that initial pop in there to say, this is the new location for things. But if they're scattered all over, if some are on OneDrive and some are on your computer and some are on her computer, it's going to be a mess. So keep them all in the same folder, wherever that is. I make distinction too at home of having one whole folder just for images that are for family and work and that kind of stuff. And another one is for Revit. And because I never know if I'm going to be coming back to a Revit model later on to re-render it or, phase 3 or something or other, I never even rename the images in there. If I need the same basic image, but I need it redder or something, I would just edit it in Photoshop, make it red, and save it as Stone's reddish for a particular project. So the original one is always in place and can always be found. And I don't know if they're ever going to change the way that it works, but you could have another couple of megabytes of image files, and that's the last thing we need to start loading into a Revit model, although it would be convenient. So what I like to do is to start with the simplest possible material, create this together so we're starting at the same place. I'm going to go to a new project using the Imperial-Architectural template, not the construction template. You might have to scroll down to get that. Okay. And for those of you who haven't yet done this, let me just show you how to make it so the architectural one's always on the top and is the one that's used when you're just starting a new project. If we go to File, Options, and you can do this while we're at it, and then File Locations, this is the order in which those different templates appear there in that startup screen. And you can just move them around by selecting them and moving it up or down wherever you want it to be in the list. So just stick the Imperial-Architectural one at the top and say OK. And now that will be the one that you start with every time. And one of the reasons to do that for this class is that the Revit, that architectural model comes with some materials already in it that the construction model doesn't have. It basically has concrete and dirt, This one at least has some paints and some brick patterns and wood floors and carpeted floors. So let's just make ourselves a simple scene. Let's do a floor. I'm going to make the wood finish floor just so I have something with a texture on it to start with. Rectangle, wood floor joist, something like this big. 20 by 20, 15 by 20. Okay. And then let's put the generic wall without any material associated just along this side. And I'm doing it along there because it'll shade easily. The sun sort of comes in from this direction when we start doing our little test renders. Let's go to architecture wall. Generic basic wall is fine. I'm going to locate this on the finished face of the exterior. So it sits on top of the wall like that, on top of the floor. And that came in at 20 feet high. I think I'll kick that down to be 10 feet high. I'm gonna set up that 3D view as well, and then split the screen between the two, which is in view tile views. ZA will zoom all your windows to each of them to fill the screen. So this is sort of our little test kitchen for the day. And I used to have people all doing their own, and everybody's was different, and so now we just do the same thing. Learning to love the materials browser. That's over here under Manage Materials. We can see the ones that are already included in the model, and this architectural template has many more than the construction template does. So with each of them, a couple of different tabs. The graphics tab up at the top shows how it will appear in non-rendered views, just like an inline ceiling plan. And the appearance tab shows what it's going to look like once it's been rendered. If you want to see something in more detail, you can grab this line right here and drag it down to get a bigger picture to know what you're dealing with. And then we can see this in a couple of different scenes. If you click on this, we can change the object shape from a canvas to, let's say, a cube. This is where we look at brick and that kind of stuff. This funny object, a 6-foot-high wall for scale. I mostly use a cube because that gives me, a couple of different planes to address. There's this thing called environment, where we're changing the lighting on this. So maybe a more interior look just to get a feel for it. But what is snowfield? It's like, I don't know. Where do they invent these things? And lastly, I never use these. I mean, I just go with the box. So I'm going to change environment back to this sort of generic lighting thing here. And then with render settings, right now it just sort of puts it up like in the realistic mode. If you go to render settings and production quality, it'll actually like render it there, but it takes a while. It's still like thinking. So the heck with that. Who's got the time? If you know there's one in here and you don't want to scroll down, I'm going to look for brick, BRI, up here in the search bar, brick, and we get a couple of, I don't know why that one's came up, but common brick is the one I just want to look at to see what's going on here. We got a brick common. So there's that. Usually this appears to me, but it looks like the last one I used is the one that's going to come up, which is okay. A couple things we have here about a brick material is this brick material, the asset attached to it is like the masonry asset, which has, this is meaning brick or CMUs, but we'll leave it here for now. So we have an image that is going to get just repeated and repeated and repeated vertically and horizontally until it fills the face that we're looking at. Here's the name of that image, which is, as we can see, deeply way down in the Autodesk materials. These are common files that AutoCAD uses, and they know exactly where they are. Revit uses them, they know exactly where they are. 3D Studio Max uses them, all from Autodesk, and they know where they are. So you just don't mess with them, don't change them, don't move them, just leave them there. So you make your own, just my Revit materials. It's fine, it's easy. So a couple things with this masonry asset, it knows a couple of things about bricks, and one of them is that bricks can be either glossy or matte or unfinished. They might be glazed, that orange tile sort of brick looking stuff. They know that bricks can be bumpy. The bricks themselves can be modeled. The mortar joints are recessed. So this also comes with the idea, along with this JPEG of the image, is a ping file PNG that's the monochrome version of that. And anywhere that this version is light will be treated as if it's raised a bit from the surface, and dark is recessed, so you can see that the mortar joints are dark. And right now we see sort of a moderate amount of, it looks sort of three-dimensional. This is a slider that goes We can crank that up to get very modeled. It doesn't actually do anything, if you'll see, to the edge of it. It's not like our edges are doing this, but the whole surface of it is. Yes, so that's that. And some of them will look at the wood grain, where this is a slider that doesn't go from, well, 0 to 2. It goes from like -2 to +2. So you can decide in my wood image if I want the whites to raise up or if I want the blacks to raise up, just to emphasize the grain that way. So that's built into the asset that this brick is based on. Let's get out of this for a second. We're going to be using Materials Manager so many times today that I would like to set up a keyboard shortcut to make that quicker to get to, because it's so hard to go to manage materials. I just want to type MM and have it. So introduction to keyboard shortcuts, just while we're at it, go to View, User Interface. So this is where we turn these guys on and off, but we're going to pick keyboard shortcuts. And these are 3 columns that can be, you just click on them and they sort alphabetically. So I'm just going to do that and then scroll down to, I guess, to materials. I could probably search that. Let's try that. Materials. Okay, so materials is the tool. I'm going to select that. And what's asking me down here at the bottom is what keystrokes do you want to assign to that? And I'm just going to say MM. It'll capitalize it already, and then assign. And says, oh, that mirror command is already assigned to MM. I always pick it from the menu. So I'm just deciding I would rather have, right now we have 2 assigned to the same one. So I'm going to say, it's okay, we'll fix it. We're going to then search on, what was it? Mirror. Mirror, here's an MM. So I'm going to pick that and remove that MM. So now I just have the one that's left. You may, in fact, assign MM to both commands, or more than that. But then there has to be a little rigmarole about selecting which one you want to use at the moment, which slows everything down. And since the point is to speed things up, I find that useless and never do it. Your mileage may vary. Okay, so now when I go to Manage Materials, it'll let me know that MM is the new shortcut for that over there in the upper right. So we're going to go through briefly making our own dead simple material, just a plain color, then making one that matches a real like Sherwin Williams color, then making one that's using one of our images to start with, and we'll see how far we get. But it's fun. This is a fun day. I confess. It's where it all starts to converge. Okay, creating new materials. We go to Manage Materials. And then down here at the bottom, globe is sort of its little materials icon. So this is add a material. And we have a couple of choices here, and we'll sort of work down through there. But create new material is what we want to do. So it creates a new material that's called default new material. It was not very exciting. That's not going to help. If we kept creating them, we get default material 1, default material 2, default material 3, and those aren't useful. So the first thing we're going to do is rename this to something that we can come back to. Right-click, rename. You probably noticed from last semester, you probably have like this many materials in your models. And that's only the first screen for the kitchen project I showed you last semester. I always want the ones that and it sorts them alphabetically. I always want the ones that I use to be like at the top if I just made these especially for this project. And starting it with an underscore will bring it up. So I do underscore, and then I put my initials. So all my BG initials will be at the top, my BG materials, all the ones that I've made for this project. And then let's just make this one be red. Red something. And it floats to the top. And that's really the only way we have to sort this is alphabetically one way or the other, I think. Yeah. Oh, by material color. Interesting. Anyway, so red. We have to think about how things are going to show up in the realistic and rendered views, as well as the non-rendered ones, wireframe, hidden line, shaded, and consistent colors, like that. So we'll start in graphics, which is how it's going to be represented in hidden line and the sort of simple shaded versions of things. And I pretty much always just say for color, you use whatever color we're going to assign it over here to appearance. Because I could be making this purple here and red here, and I don't want those to get out of sync if I tweak the way it appears in the rendering. So I just say use the render appearance, and we're not going to bother with any of the rest of this for right now. Just a solid red color. And then let's change this to a cube and see if that keeps popping up for us. And generic materials, you know, we didn't start with a paint, we didn't start with a brick, we didn't start with the wood, have all these options that we're mostly just going to deal with the color at this point. And let's just make this color be, you know, a nice rich red. So we can see that's all red, no green, no blue on the RGB scale of things. That's red. You click apply if you want to remember those and keep working. You click OK if you want them saved and to get back out into the rest of the program. So let's get over here and set our visual style here to shaded. And let's create a new box here that uses that red stuff. Just a generic component, architecture component, model in place. This could be any kind of thing. Let's just say generic model because it's not really furniture or anything. Call this red box. And then we need to make the thing, which will be an extrusion, rectangle, some kind of rectangle, okay. Some kind of height, okay. And we'll say done. So when I pick this object, I can't change its material here in the model. If an object doesn't have one or more material parameters assigned to it in its properties, and we'll do that in a week or two, you can only change the materials of objects by taking them back to the environment where they were created. It's like, I think I was taking it back to the shop. Take it back, spray paint it, bring it back. So if I select it and go to edit in place, since it was created with model in place, now I can select it again and change its material to that red that we were looking at. And okay, howie zowie. It is red. It's quite red. You'll find that we can change the materials of the walls and the floors here in this view because this is where they were created. There's no shop to take them back to. They're just like right here. Let's maybe zoom in here a little bit and under, let's look at this in the realistic mode. So that gives us the materiality. I meant to turn shadows on, so let's do that as well. So we're in visual style, graphic display options, shadows on, the ones that the sun is going to cast. Okay, so that's our little view there. And when we go to render this, RR is the shortcut for render, already built in. And we just do this in draft mode and hit render. We can start seeing a couple of things. The red color we made is just a flat red. It's not reflective at all. It's not glossy. It's certainly not reflective. But you can see in the floor over here, we're getting the reflection of that wall in here. Down here, we can see the reflection of this dark part of the cube. Over here, we can see the reflection of the light part of the cube. So I'm going to work towards getting this red box to be equally reflective just to see what how that'll work. So let's just just to make it reflective and see if we can get it to reflect the floor at the same time that the floor is reflecting it. You know, a little bouncing back and forth. Let's go to Manage Materials and crank this all the way up to, well, actually, glossiness is different from reflective. Glossy just means it picks up highlights. Reflective means it's got a mirror capability. So we'll leave the glossiness where it is and turn reflectability on, and we can see the little preview going on here. Let's leave them both at 50 just for fun. And we see a little bit of difference here in the, even in the realistic view. It's a little, you know, it's not this flat color. Go back to render RR. And in fact, it's so reflective that it's, you know, this side over here is reflecting, you know, whatever. It's sort of picking up light coming from the side. Plus, you know, here's the top of the wall. I guess that's like the top of the wall across there. A lot going on there in just that simple image. I mean, reflections of reflections is sort of what we're starting to see. Let's crank this up to medium. Start seeing if anything shows up. Okay, I'm done with that. A couple other things we can do to materials, even ones that come with Revit. The image itself for this floor will stay the same, but we might decide that's just lighter than I want. It's lighter than that building. I don't want to have to go and copy that JPEG and make it darker and find a place to put it and reconnect to it. I would just like that to appear, that material to appear darker in this image on my oak floors. So I'll go back to Manage Materials. And that was oak flooring. And now we see part of the assets of floors, which is you've got a picture and you can stain it if you want. Let me see what happens. Yeah, things change a little bit from version to version, so I'm never quite sure what I'm going to get. It looks like, oh, that was stained light. So let's stain it with a dark red, whatever that is, dark brown. We can sort of turn those on and off. Choose those, and you can push this any direction you want. It's starting out with a glossy varnish. You know, a couple of different versions of that you can put in there depending on your what you want your renderings to look like. Used for flooring, used for furniture. I don't know what difference that makes. Let's see, we're also running out of room here. If I didn't stain that, if the way that looked wasn't doing it for me, I can also, a lot of these have a tint option. You might even think of that as like a transparent varnish, color being added to the varnish that's just applied globally over the whole thing. And then what I mentioned before, we also have this relief pattern where we're going to say based on wood grain, right now it's at about 0. If I crank it up, the light parts appear higher. If I slide it back, I think the light parts appear lower, recessed. Get in the view you want and dial that in to make it look the way you want. But that's a different slider than we have for the masonry, which only recesses the dark. I can't choose which goes up and which goes down. And I got options, but they're different options in terms of glossiness than I have for paint. I mean, varnish is a lot different from paint anyhow. So there's a lot to explore here, as you can tell. Let's set this back. If we set it back to 0, it goes flat. We crank it up a little bit. I think it was at like 0.2 or 0.15 or something is where that started on some arbitrary scale. Anyway, explore those. Those are the kinds of controls we have over colors that we make, just flat colors, and then materials that come with Revit. But now let's create a true paint material from one that's in Sherwin Williams's new catalog. Yeah, we'll save this. desktop. Okay, good. We're creating a material. And we know that it wants to be a paint material. And right now we don't actually have any paints in here that know about all the ways that paint is applied and what the surfaces are. So the first thing we do is go get one from the material libraries that are on disk. And right now these have been sort of hidden, but this materials browser, materials manager, has a top part where it says the project materials, which are all the ones in our model right now. And the material libraries are where extra ones are stored on disk that we can go get and bring into our model. And I'm going to pick the AEC materials one. And I don't have much room. Let's see if I can pull this up a little bit. So I'm just going to scroll down. I could type paint up here, but I'm going to scroll down. LMNOP, a lot of materials, ladies, gentlemen. Oh, what did I say? Paint. Paint. Between oxygen and palladium, which is oxygen. How are you going to render oxygen? I don't know. I have no idea. Anyway, paint, and we have two little arrows here. The arrow means just bring it up into our list, so that we will now have the paint material in our project, and the one with arrow and the little pencil means bring it up here and then just start editing it right away. But I want to bring it up first and then rename it and then edit it. Click up. Oh, cancel. Say it again. Oh, I'm on paint. Sorry. Thank you. I couldn't figure that out. Up we go. Okay, there's paint. And it's some sort of gray pearly paint just to start with. I'm going to rename that Sherwin Williams 9684 Azure Tide. So we'll select it, right click, rename. I'm doing paint, starting with the word paint. So all my paints will be just listed alphabetically right together. And then SW, there's a, you can, that's real common for Sherwin Williams, GL for Glidden, I forget the others. And then the number, 9684. I usually put a space in there, actually. And then AZURE Tide. And let's call this matte. Okay, there's that. So now we need to turn it into that. And the reason for putting all that in there is if I can't quite remember, what was that Sherwin Williams one? I can just type in SW and all the SWs will just appear right there and nothing else. Or if I remember 9684, I could type that in and that would be the only one that shows up here when I'm searching for it in the search bar. So Azure Tide matte finish, because that'll be a different material from the Azure Tide glossy finish. Two different cans of paint. So first of all, we'll start at graphics and just again say use render appearance. Whatever blue we pick up there in render appearance is we want to show here. Keep them synchronized. And then the color here, I went to the website and down here on page 3, this is just a screenshot from their website. And you see the RGB values there are 67, 101, 133, always in that order, red, green, blue. So red 67, 101, 133. And since we've called this one matte, we'll change its finish to matte. And since it's a wall, we're going to say it's put on with a roller. And I don't know how good your eyeballs have to be or how accurate your rendering has to be to tell the difference in a rendering between something that was put on with a roller and put on with a spray can, a spray brush. I don't know, but it's there. It's part of the asset. So we don't have wood grain here as an option. So this is just all one essentially flat thing. We can tint it if we want to. if you want to tone it down. But I would only start to do that after I'd done my renderings and they look really good, but this was just too light compared to a paint chip. That's when I might want to tint it up or down accordingly, just to get that rendering working. And I should say that Revit comes with Pantone colors we can match, and from pretty much all the paint companies, you can download their paint libraries. You can just choose things by their name instead of having to type the numbers in. That's really a very easy process. You download the libraries as zip files from BIMsmith or the individual manufacturer's website, extract them, and then put them in a folder on your hard drive. And then tell Revit to open the library or libraries you want to have available. Then just pick a paint and load it into the project. Let's change this guy, or at least paint some of its faces. We'll change the whole thing, actually. I'm going to change this guy to the blue, to the matte azure blue, edit in place. And the reason we have to pick it again is included in this model in place object, we could have had 3 or 4 different objects. For instance, you can make all the legs of a table at the same time and they're treated as one thing. Here we have to say specifically this piece of geometry, I want to change the material to search on SW. So we're going to assign that material to this whole object. Okay. And then since we're still in the edit in place mode, we need to finish that to get out of here and turn that into a blue box. Now we're going to make a glossy version of it. Back into the materials manager. Now I want the same thing, but I want a glossy one. I can either right click to duplicate it, or I can select it and go down to here, duplicate materials and assets, just depending on what you like. But the crucial point here is duplicate the material and its assets so that our glossy version is entirely separate from our matte version. When you don't do that, you can get 2 materials that one's a duplicate of the other, and you change one and the other changes, like they both turn to tiger stripe. It's, when you wanted one to be green and one to be tiger stripe. And that always seems to happen the night before a presentation when everything is changed to a different material. So we want to just whenever we make these guys, we want them to be entirely separate standalone materials. I would just always use duplicate materials and assets. And we can just rename this to be glossy, Azure Blue Glossy, and then change it to gloss. Not reflective. We'll get little highlights on the corners, stuff like that. This, however, is still matte. Let's make another shape and make it be glossy and see if we can tell the difference. I'm going to make like a cylinder here. Architecture, component, model in place. We'll stay with generic. Cylinder. Extrusion, circular. And then since I'm still in the shop where this is being created, I can select it, go to material, and pick the glossy one. So right color, right finish. Okay. And then I can finish the model. So the only time we're really going to see anything happening with glossy is when we render it. Reflective we'd see otherwise, but rendering glossy is so subtle that it's it's not really reflective, but in here you can see a little bit of the of this shadow getting picked up just as it's sort of minimally reflected in the gloss of the material. If we had wanted that to be truly reflective, so we'd pick up the reflections of the floor in that cylinder, instead of having this azure blue paint material, with all of its built-in asset-based qualities. If we just wanted to make it really, really glossy, like we were going to varnish this so it really reflected, I would then just create a regular generic material using this color that we could then make reflective and add that into it. But adding reflective is not something we can just do to a paint. That's not what paints do. Okay, let's talk about making a material from an image. Let's go to Manage Materials. I'm going to go to New, create new material. And we're going to use is the carpet image, which is essentially this shape. And these are 24 by 24 carpet squares. So the whole thing is 96 by 96. And that's something that we're going to need to tell Revit while we're making this material. Does it put it down this big on the floor or it's full size when it gets around to rendering things? Default new material, that's just the one that gets created all the time. Let's right click and rename and call this carpet squares. Carpet squares. In the floor plan, it's going to be helpful to see where the edges of the squares are in the hidden line views. So we can add to this something we didn't add to the paint, a hatch pattern for these carpet tiles in place. And we have two possible background surface patterns. One is the foreground, that's the one we'll use, that's just the lines. We could have like a light shaded something to it, which I'm not going to deal with. Our foreground pattern. I can't remember if we addressed these last semester. Let's pretend we didn't. There are two types of patterns. The ones that always show up exactly the same size, no matter if the view is at 1/8 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch, doesn't matter. It's always going to be the same size on the plotted page, which we don't want. We want a pattern that will appear larger in a 1/2 inch scale view than in an 1/8 inch scale view. So we want to be scaling our pattern to the model. And the one we're going to use for this is 24 by 24, and there's already one made that's 24 by 24 that we've used for ceiling tile. And it's fine. There's nothing about this pattern that locks it into being used with a ceiling. It's like, look, it's 24 by 24, just wherever we happen to have it show up. We can create new ones. We'll address that at some point, not today. So it'll show up like this in monochrome views and in just the plain old shaded views. But here in appearance is where we're going to put in the image that we want to use. We're not using color. We're using an image, which for me is in desktop carpet. So carpet, okay. And now we need to tell it how big do we want this to be. So if we click on the image and we get this little dialog that's saying, here's this image, it's from, it's from here to here. How big is that really? And I see that in actual fact, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 carpet squares, which is 96 inches, the original image. So it's 96 by 96, and that's what I need to tell it, is that my sample size here, and Revit has no idea how big this is to start with. It just makes everything 1 foot by 1 foot. That much image really represents 8 feet by 8 feet. And I can see these, for some reason, are defaulting to inches. Revit usually thinks in terms of feet, but this is going to inches, so I'll do 8 feet. If it's a square image, it'll just immediately click into 8 feet by 8 feet. If you need these to be different sizes, you can unlock them over here and then make this one anything you want. So I want these both to be 8 feet. And no matter how big the room is, the floor is what we're going to be like applying this to. It will just flood the floor. It will just keep repeating this 8 foot module vertically and horizontally until it runs out of room. Done. So we've named it. We have an image. We have a size. Glossiness, I don't think is going to apply to this. So we're going to slide the glossiness down to 0 and not address any of these at all right now. As you can see, they deal whether it's a transparent material like a glass or plastic, whether it's something like a fence that has holes in it, whether it glows, whether it's bumpy, and then again, our old friend tint. But we're just going to say carpet squares, okay. Now, because the floor here was made here in the model, this is the shop where it's made, and this is the shop where we can change it. Two possibilities here. One is to redefine this floor as whatever kind of a floor that is, wood floor with carpet on it, or we can just paint the carpet onto that. I'd like to explore that right now. We select the floor, pick paint, and it will usually come right back to the image material you most recently did, carpet squares, and click on whatever it is. And it just paints it. I think I'd probably make that a little darker, but that's for fine tuning later on. Let's imagine that I accidentally painted the wall as well. Oops, that's not what I want. Although I have to tell you, Miller IT, that when I was here, that was the cafeteria upstairs, and they had carpeted the ceiling was sort of big coffers, and they'd carpeted all those for sound absorption, but they just absorbed restaurant odors, So like by the second week of school, it was like you could tell what they'd had the week before. It was terrible. Anyway, so if you want to take the carpet off the walls, we can go here and click the down arrow on remove paint and click back to it. If I do that to the floor, it'll put back the actual material that's been defined for that. That's still the underlying floor structure there is with wood on it. It's like hardwood under carpet. And so what if we would like to make a rug for this desk and chair? I could model a thin rug-sized solid on the floor and set its material to carpet squares. But what I really rather do, I'm getting a little off the syllabus here. I'd really like to essentially paint some carpet squares on the floor underneath that furniture. And that's the split face tool. We pick this, pick the floor, and this funny little icon up here is called split face. And I thought for a long time it was an old CRT television screen. It's not. It's showing that that's like a wall painted white that has a blue thing on it. So we're just going to create a rectangle in this case that's a different material from the thing itself. Modify split face. Oh, we have to pick the object. Then that's how we do it. And I'm going to do that in this view instead of 3D view, because what we have here when we're splitting a face is the borders of that space right now. And you can think of these yellow lines as if they represent masking tape. That's as far as the paint is going to go. If I mask out this area right here, each time I do this, I can split the face of the floor, in this case, into only two areas, an inside or an outside, or a right and a left. If I need to subdivide it farther, I need to go back and repeat the process. But so I divide it into an inside and outside. So I'll say, okay. And now I have a separate area, a separate face within the face of the floor. And I can now use paint on that, carpet squares on that, to just paint that carpet. These edges are can be moved. The whole thing can be moved. I guess I need to do edit boundary if I want to make it bigger, but it's pretty fast way to do that. Let me get into plan view here. Where those grid lines come in is, it would be nice to be able to use the grid lines to be able to position the squares relative to the edge of the carpet. And as you'll see right now, I guess they're pretty close. But the way we make that explicit to get the black lines to line up with the edges of the carpet squares is to go to Manage Materials, Carpet Squares, Graphics. And what I want to do is align these lines with the carpet squares. So that's under, I got a texture here. I want to align that with the image. And this will come up in a minute or two. I can't see that. But if you use the arrow key, you can, this is terrible. You can just barely see a yellow line moving up and down, right and left. It was really good to start with, to tell you the truth. We'll say okay. It's more common to have to do this with brick to get the lines right, like in the middle of the courses. I've written to Autodesk like 40 times to say, make these bright orange for heaven's sake, but they so far ignored my plea. Okay, so it seems like it did a pretty good job. It's like, this is just about equal to this, and these are equal to this. But I really would like to align the carpet squares better, so I don't have these little pieces out at the edges. And that's where, if we just pick this, to refresh your memory, when there's an option to pick several things with the cursor in one place, you can just hover and hit Tab until the thing that you want is highlighted, and then click it. And now I can use that actually to move the grid, and because the grid has been aligned to the image, it will move the image as well once we say, okay, do I have to do that? Okay, so just did it. So now we have a full square, little guys here, little guys here. So I think what I'll do then is edit boundary, move that in a little bit. Boundary, move that up a little bit. It doesn't preview well. Or I could have just made my initial rectangle 10 by 12 feet and it would have fit right in there, but I just eyeballed it. Anyway, so I'm a little bit, I guess that's pretty good. Let me do a further subdivision of this floor to illustrate a further use of the split face tool. I'll make the top half of this room be one flooring material and the bottom half be another. I don't know, I just made this up. To split this floor again into an upper and a lower half, I'll pick the tool, split face, then pick the floor, and then I'm just going to draw from here to here, escape, and then from here to here. In each case, from yellow masking tape to yellow masking tape. So again, I've only split one face into two, an upper and a lower, and I'm just going from putting my tape across here from one piece of tape to another piece of tape, and the same thing over here. Okay. And at this point, I haven't given them a new material, but if I go to pick the floor, paint, I'll pick this carpet over here and paint that. Another use for the split face tool is to give different materials to the parts of a wall that are in different rooms. So I'll move some furniture around and create 2 rooms on this floor. I'm going to draw a partition wall, just a little interior partition from here to here. This side of the wall is going to be blue, and this side of the wall is going to stay where it is. So I know that something Dimitri had the seniors do last year, which is wrong, which is to put thin planes of 3/8 inch things of color on the walls. And he said it was like putting on, applying a layer of gypboard to that wall. And that's not how you do that. It's like it just doubles the number of wall surfaces in your building. But if I want this to be blue over here, and this to say gray over here because we haven't decided, I need to split the face on this wall as well. A vertical split face. It's not 2 walls. It's 1 wall, and I've just got a coat of paint over here. So I'm gonna split this surface just the way I split the floor surface. And I need to be in an elevation or a 3D view to do it. I'm going to go to Modify, Split Face, pick that, so we can see. Sorry, let me change this into a hidden line view. It's easier to see. turn the shadows off for a minute. Shadows. So we're going to go split face. And here I get to decide which face I'm doing. I'm not splitting the top, I'm not splitting the side, I'm splitting the front. So wait till that highlights and then click. And now in 3D, I get my yellow painter's masking tape all around there. So given that that wall might move a little, I'll just go from the middle of that wall straight on down to the floor. So there, that's been split. Okay. No outward change. Oh, I didn't. That wall doesn't go quite to that wall. No outward change. But then when I go back to my colored view and put my paint, do my Sherwin Williams blue matte here, then I can paint that and leave that undone. If I decide I want that to be something else, it is all ready to go to have another color. PT is for paint, parking stripe yellow. And there we are. So one wall, infinitely thin layer of paint on it. Here's something that might be fun. In Italian restaurants where the grit comes through the plaster, you know, that look. Let's do that. Let's take a paint, split face. Right line, we go. I'm just drawing this weird shape. Typed PT for the paint tool. Yeah, you know, that Olive Garden look. You know, you guys are really fortunate to be in the presence of a design master here. You know, we don't charge extra. Any number of kinds of things you could do with that. This could be super graphics on a wall. Just slice them and paint them different colors or anything like that. These could also be done with decals. More on that in the weeks to come. And I need to make clear that in anything like a professional setting, breaking a wall into pieces just to be able to paint each one separately is not an acceptable solution to having adjoining rooms with different paint colors. You may not do it with walls that another discipline has placed, structural engineer or architect, and you should not do it with the ones you have placed. If partition walls come in from both sides at different places, all of a sudden you have walls split in the middle of a room, multiple sections that won't move together or change type together. In other words, a mess. The answer, as in the real world, is one wall, many painted faces. Back from break. Now let's do something fun. Let's not do carpet squares. Let's use the image from Blackboard called Pattern.jpg. I just collect this stuff. Is some sort of textured wall thing, and I would like to turn that into a pattern that we can use for walls. And the only thing we need to decide is about how big is that? A foot by foot? 2 feet by 2 feet? You know, it doesn't matter to me. I don't know how big it was. It just came like this is a JPEG. But we'll take a look. We'll go into Manage Materials. This will be a new material. And we're just going to create it with that image. We don't know what it might have in terms of texture or anything. We'll just take what we get from there. And I'm going to rename this to be Squiggle. Squiggle was the name of a program that came out as an add-in for AutoCAD it was the first one that would take an AutoCAD plot file and make the lines wiggle. And you could dial in how much they wavered and how much they broke and how much they extended. The intent was to have what came out of CAD blend with other drawings that were done by hand. So Squiggle, okay. There's really no foreground pattern we can apply to this. I'm not going to even try. This will just be a straightforward putting an image on there. The image will be this one called Pattern JPEG, right? So this probably is the wrong way to pre-visualize this, huh? So let's change that over to maybe this glass curtain wall thing, so we see it as a wall. We do need to pick a size. Is that delicate? Is that monstrous? You each can choose your own. But the where we choose is just by clicking on the image itself. And again, this was actually the image within this 12 by 12 inch rectangle is actually the original image. And then it's starting to repeat it horizontally and vertically, so we see how it matches up with itself at the edges, which is perfectly right now. Make this any size you want. I'm going to do 6 inches just for fun. And because this was locked, that one changes to 6 by 6 as well. Let's experiment a little bit. I can invert it. Now there's a look. Brightness, I forget what that does. Oh, it just dims the whole thing. Now let's keep it up here. That's all I want to do. Okay. Oh, and you can rotate it. So those are the basic controls we have for any image. And the problem with rotating it is it's going to repeat itself, copy, 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 and they're just not going to line up around the edges. This has been pretty carefully made just to work at 0, so we'll do that. Okay. I'm just going to paint it onto this wall here. TT for paint. Squiggle. Squiggle. There we go. And our brick is still there, and our blue is still over there on that side. And what you can see is because the image was carefully done, it repeats itself horizontally and vertically very, very crisply with no visible joints. So that was easy. Let's go to the wall pattern 57, which is bigger than we need. We're gonna have to figure out how much of it to crop to in Photoshop to get an image that will repeat cleanly. So let's open Photoshop. Pretty much when I'm doing this, have these two programs just open all the time, sort of in my materials making phase of a project. And when you get here, open that wall pattern 57 JPEG. So here's the wall pattern 57 file. And what we need to do here is identify enough of this that will fully repeat the image horizontally and vertically. And it's got to be a rectangle.
We can't use hexagons.
So it looks to me, here's the crop tool. It doesn't matter if we include 1 flower or 2 flowers or 8 flowers, as long as it's a rectangle and will repeat and not look funny at the tops and the bottoms. So I think the simplest thing would be to take it like from here to here. Let's see what that looks like.
There are almost certainly several ways to do this here. Some vertical, some horizontal, some maybe square.
Get rid of that text. I just forget with this. No, that's not going to work because there's this shape here and there's no answering shape over there. Let's go down. Whoops. I got to be careful there. Control Z. Go down one more. I want to go to here. Yeah. Okay. Centers to centers. Okay, so this will match that. This comes up here. I tell you what's really interesting. What's really interesting is doing this with real wallpaper, where if it just goes boom, 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 boom with the pattern, that's easy. But a lot of times they go boom, 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 and then you have to grab like this big area to get something that will repeat.
While we're at it, it turns out that there are exactly 17 ways that shapes can be repeated to fill an infinite plane, with the symmetry groups shown here. These show up again and again in mathematics, crystallography, and of course, wallpaper design.
Okay, well, that looks good enough for now.
Hit enter to perform the crop.
And there's a nice way to test this that Photoshop provides that I didn't link in here, but let's see if I remember how to do it. Edit, forget, define pattern. Here we go. So we get to what we want. We go to define pattern. Okay, wall pattern 57. We'll just take off the JPEG just so we're not confused by. It was edit, define pattern. And it takes the whole image, and then to preview it, we'll start a new image. File, new. Like, at least I'm going to do it like 10 by 10 inches, just see if that gets us where we're going. I don't know. We'll see. Create. White background, fine. So this is a second file that we're just working on at the same time. And then it's like edit. How about edit fill? That'd be a good place to start. Thank you. Edit fill. And we say fill with a pattern down at the bottom. Yeah, that makes it hard to find. And what's confusing, I can save this again, wall pattern 57, and it'll have two of them next to each other, and you have to try to decipher. The most recent one is all the way over on the right. Say, okay. Looks good to me. You know, conceivably there's a little bit of, no, it's great. Yeah, geez, go for it. This will be a fun one to explore the idea where lights are raised and darks are down and the grays are in between. We could actually get some 3D modeling going on, but we'll do this for right now. So, okay, so we don't need to keep this. No. So now I'm going to save this, but with the new name, because I don't want to mess with my originals. You know, I just like to keep this. I'm going to do file. Let's do save a copy. That'll make sure it's like as a JPEG. I'm going to say wall 57 trimmed for Revit. Okay. We're done.
Now we can exit Photoshop.
And so I saved it with a new name. I don't want to save this as that original name, so I'll say no, don't save. We'll go back to new material, manage materials, new material. We don't have any assets. This is just a thing right now. Create new material. Right click, rename, flower. We call that 3D flower. And its appearance, like graphics, we won't really have anything there. Nothing's going to correspond. Maybe a hatch pattern or something, but mostly we want this. Image, desktop. Getting old. Wall pattern 57 trim for Revit. Can't beat that. Now the image is there. Now we need to tell it how big to make it. Sample size, foot by foot. So I want to make this twice as long as it is high. So I'll need to unlock these guys and say that the width is 2 feet. Remember to put the foot mark in because this defaults to inches for some reason. Sample size 2 feet. Okay, that looks good. Done. As long as we're here, we can make the image be less strong relative to this background color. So I'm sort of fading the intensity of the image. I mean, image fade, you know, barely there. Now it's 100%. And the tint actually sort of adds a color on top of that. So the color is just as strong, but there's like, so this is like adding color. This is like subtracting it. Anyway, let's leave it like this and say, okay. And I'm just going to paint back on this wall again, since we don't have to. I'll do this wall over here. PT for paint. You know, there should be a 3D flower. Okay, good. And paint. That's quite a room. But you know, it could be a fascinating ceiling texture if it's some acoustical material. You know, it'd be pretty. That would like liven things up, especially if it were bigger. You made it like each of those being
2 by 2 feet,
2 by 2 feet, or 2 by 4 feet. Now this is interesting. Well, I'm not going to deal with that right now. The last image I'd like to work with today would be to make a new material with the boards image. We'll have to do something similar to. It's not quite ready to
turn into a material.
To manage materials, new material, rename. I'm doing _BG boards. I don't know what it's going to look like yet, so I'm going to skip over the graphics and just go to appearance and go get the boards picture. It doesn't look like it's using this most recent one, I have to say. So let's see what needs to be done with that. We can drag this as well to make that bigger. And you see on the image, we've got an even board, but eventually there's a skinny board. I think at the bottom, there's just a little bit of skinniness in the original JPEG that we can't trim out here in Revit. If we want to have that as like a little accent strip, we could leave it. But I think the point of this is, no, let's just try to make it, you know, we'll never get them lined up the same from one wall to the next. So let's bear in mind that we need to get rid of wherever that little extra piece shows up. I should have left Photoshop open. Open. Boards. There it is. Well, you see, we've got basically a board and a shadow and a board and a shadow. And up here, we've got the little remnants of a shadow at the top. So I think if we can just use our cropping tool again, just drag that up so there's just the littlest bit. And so the little tiny bit of shadow at the bottom of this board will blend in with what's left over at the top of the image. I don't know about end to end yet, so let's just hit enter. File, save a copy, boards, trimmed for. Revit. Okay. I think we are done with Photoshop now. Don't need to save this one. We've got the other one. So we're still in the materials browser. What I need to do here is to change the image. And I think I can just pick Boards.jpg, the name right here. Yeah, and just say use the trimmed one instead. You'll just switch that out. And you know, I'm imagining that if these are each 6 inches, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that's 8 feet by 20 feet, just sort of making numbers up here. Yeah, unclick that. Width, 20 feet, height, 8 feet. Close enough. Okay. No glossy on these guys. We might want to tint it later on, but we'll just deal with that some other point. Let's put that on here. Paint, boards, Click. And it's a small enough image and large enough that's a little fuzzy. I really spend some time looking for as high resolution images on the net as I can find. I mean, it's going to look fine
from
this
a distance,
way, but it's not
so
so great if we have
up.
that as a that's a pretty
blanded material.
wall. I would like to get a little more color into that. So I think I'll do manage materials, and I think I'll add a tint to it. Our color strength is up at 100. That's as strong as it can be. Without actually going back and changing the JPEG, I think I'll just add a reddish brown. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's add some real red to it. Whew. And that's on some sort of a slider as well. Oh, well, no, it's not. Apply. Okay, well, that's significantly different look that is just easy to do like that. The one last thing I'd like to address, I know we're about out of here, but I have never liked the fact that this oak floor the pieces are so short. I want them to look like they're, like 6 foot long pieces. So if we go back to manage materials and edit that material, I could go into Photoshop, take that image wherever it happens to be, but that's like this is one of Autodesk's own images. I have to copy it and stretch it and put it somewhere else. I just want to make that longer in the image. So oak. Pick this. Okay, I think they're a good width, 2 foot, 3/4 of an inch. Let's unclick those and make the length,
which is to say
the
width
length
of the image
this way, be 6 feet, 10 feet. Okay, that's more like the way floors go down. Done. So that's been changed in this drawing. For every time we use that oak flooring, has nothing to do with
past or future projects
or future images, because we haven't changed the JPEG at all. Apply. Okay. So that's reasonable. And actually, I was thinking that each of those pieces is 10 feet long. So really, I might want to make the whole, because there are a couple made up, I might want to make that 20 feet long or something. So the pieces themselves, they probably come in 8 foot bundles, something like that. So maybe the whole thing is 24 feet long or something. Anyway, so you can start to see the repeat showing up. C'est la vie. It's a repeated image. One of the things we'll be looking at, I guess, next Thursday
will be a couple of ways to minimize the obviousness of repeats.
If you have a couple of things just at the end, notes and caveats. There can only be one material with a given name in any model at one time. You can have a black leather 01, black leather 02, black leather 03, and that's fine. But if you have a black leather couch and you bring in a black leather chair from BIM object that defines it differently, with a different JPEG or a different texture, what's in the drawing will override what comes in from BIM object. And the reason for that is you don't want to bring a foreign piece of furniture in and have everything that's in your drawing already change, like redefine walnut or redefine concrete. So what you've got stays, and the guests have to use the host's materials. When you do bring in a sofa or something from BIM object, and it's got 5 or 6 materials, let's say that they're ones you don't have, they will be added to your material list. And even if you erase the sofa, the materials will stay. And the way that works without you having to download a bunch of materials for that is pretty much everything you'll see on a big website like that will use one or more of the Autodesk standard materials that maybe a tint has been added to it or something. But it's the same JPEGs that every Autodesk user in the world has the identical copies of. Sometimes a download will, like Herman Miller and all, have lots of fabrics. And they have a whole fabric library that you load in, tell Revit where to look for them, and then when you use a Herman Miller, settee or something or other that has some particular gray nubby wool or something on it, gray nubby wool will be in the Herman Miller library of materials, and it can find it and use it.
Just like the Sherwin Williams ones for paint.
Well, that's all I have time to talk about today. It's been fun. It's getting good. Time to go home.